The American Civil War, a conflict that tore a nation apart, gave rise to legendary figures whose names are etched into the very annals of history. Among them stands James Longstreet, Old Pete to his men, a general whose tactical brilliance and steadfast loyalty were only matched by the controversies that would later surround him. Longstreet was a man of contradictions, a Southern patriot who fought tirelessly for the Confederacy, yet later aligned himself with the Union cause during Reconstruction. His story is one of both heroism and tragedy, of unwavering conviction and bitter betrayal. Born into a South defined by its tradition and culture, Longstreet would arise from humble beginnings to become one of the most influential military leaders of his time. His journey from dusty plains of Georgia to blood-soaked fields of Gettysburg is one of relentless determination and complex legacy. But like all men who leave their mark on history, Longstreet's path was not without its trials. The decisions he made on the battlefield, particularly at Gettysburg, would haunt him long after the guns fell silent, casting a shadow over his military genius and staining his legacy in the eyes of many. Longstreet's story is more than just a tale of war. It's a story of a man caught between two worlds, one that was dying and one that was being born. It's a story of loyalty tested, of a warrior who found himself on the wrong side of history, and a legacy that took over a century to begin to heal. Join us as we explore the life of James Longstreet, from his early days in the South to his rise as Robert E. Lee's most trusted general, and finally to his later years as a man misunderstood by many. This is the story of Old Pete, a story of valor, controversy, and redemption. On this episode of History with Tim, we delve into the life of General James Longstreet, a man whose legacy is as enduring as it is debated. James Longstreet was born on January 8th, 1821, in the Edgefield district of South Carolina, a place where the old Southern traditions ran deep. The Longstreet family was of Dutch descent, and they have been established in the American colonies for generations. Though born in South Carolina, James would spend much of his childhood in Georgia and Alabama, where he was raised in the values of hard work, honor, and loyalty, qualities that would define his life. James was fifth of 9 children, and his early life was marked by a rugged simplicity of Southern agrarian living. His father, James Longstreet Sr., was a successful farmer and played a significant role in his son's upbringing. The young Longstreet learned the values of perseverance on the family farm, where he developed a strong, sturdy frame and a resilience that would serve him well in the years to come. Education, though not as formalized as it would become later in the century, was still a priority for the Longstreet family. James was sent to the local schools, where he received a basic education, but it was his mother, Mary Ann Dent Longstreet, who instilled in him a sense of duty and moral rectitude. She was a deeply religious woman, and her influence would resonate throughout Longstreet's life, particularly in the sense of honor and responsibility. In 1838, at the age of 17, Longstreet received an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point, a prestigious opportunity that marked the beginning of a military career. This was no small feat. West Point was one of the premier institutions in the nation, producing many of the military leaders who would later shape American history. West Point, on the banks of the Hudson River in New York, was a far cry from rural South Longstreet had known. The academy was a rigorous environment designed to mold young men into officers capable of leading troops into battle. The curriculum was challenging, emphasizing mathematics, engineering, and military strategy, But for Longstreet, academics were not his strong suit. James Longstreet was not a star student. He graduated 54 out of 62 in the class of 1842. However, what he lacked in academic prowess, he made up for in character and camaraderie. West Point was where he forged a lifelong friendship with men like Ulysses S. Grant and William Rosecrans, relationships that would later shape the course of his life, both in peace and in war. Upon his graduation, Longstreet was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 4th U.S. Infantry, embarking on a military career that would span more than 3 decades. His first posting took him to the western frontier, where he served in the Indian Wars, gaining valuable experience in leadership and combat. But it was in the Mexican-American War that Longstreet first distinguished himself as a capable and courageous officer. Serving under the command of General Zachary Taylor, and later General Winfield Scott, Longstreet fought in some of the most significant battles of the war, including the Siege of Veracruz and the Battle of Monterrey. At the Battle of Chapultepec in 1847, Longstreet's bravery came at a high cost. As he carried the regimental colors forward, he was severely wounded in the thigh by a musket ball. Despite his injury, Longstreet refused to leave the field, continuing to direct his men until the battle was won. His actions earned him a brevet promotion to major, and he emerged from the war with a reputation of courage and leadership. The wounds he sustained in Mexico were not physical. They were formative, deepening his resolve and shaping his views on leadership and responsibility. The Mexican-American War was a proving ground for many of the officers who would later play pivotal roles in the Civil War. And for Longstreet, it was a defining chapter in his early military career. As the 1850s progressed, Longstreet's military career continued to advance, yet the clouds of conflict were gathering on the horizon. The nation was heading towards an inevitable and bloody confrontation, and Longstreet would soon find himself at the heart of it. But first, there was a period of peace, one last calm before the storm. As the United States teetered on the brink of civil war in 1861, James Longstreet was faced with a choice that would alter the course of his life and the history of the nation. He had served with distinction in the United States Army for nearly 2 decades, yet his loyalty to his home state of South Carolina and to the Southern cause would ultimately lead him to resign his commission in the Union Army and cast in his lot with the Confederacy. On June 1st, 1861, Longstreet resigned his commission as a major in the U.S. Army. His decision was not made lightly, but like many Southern officers, he felt a profound sense of duty to his native South. Longstreet's journey into the Confederate States Army marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would see him rise to the highest ranks of military leadership. Longstreet quickly joined the Confederate cause, receiving a commission as a brigadier general. He was assigned to command a brigade in the Confederate Army of the Potomac, which was then under the command of General P.G.T. Beauregard. His first major engagement would come at the First Battle of Bull Run, also known as First Manassas, where he would begin to establish his reputation as a competent and fearless leader. On July 21st, 1861, the Union and Confederate forces clashed near Manassas, Virginia. The battle was chaotic and brutal, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Longstreet's brigade was positioned on the Confederate right, where they played a crucial role in holding the line against repeated Union assaults. Despite the confusion, the intensity of the battle, Longstreet remained calm and collected, demonstrating the steady leadership that would become his hallmark. His performance at Bull Run earned him the respect of his peers and superiors, including General Joseph E. Johnston, who recognized Longstreet's potential for a higher command. It was a promising start, but it was only the beginning of what would become a storied career in the Confederate Army. As the war progressed, Longstreet's responsibilities grew. In October of 1861, he was promoted to Major General and given command of a division in the newly formed Army of Northern Virginia. The Peninsula Campaign in the spring of 1862 was Longstreet's first major test as a divisional commander. Union General George B. McClellan launched a massive offensive aimed at capturing Richmond, the Confederate capital. Longstreet's division was at the forefront of the defense, engaging in several key battles, including the Battle of Williamsburg and the Battle of Seven Pines. Longstreet's performance during the Peninsula Campaign solidified his reputation as one of the South and newly established General Lee's most reliable and aggressive commanders. He was instrumental in the Confederate Army's ability to thwart McClellan's advance, a feat that earned him further praise from Lee, who would come to refer to Longstreet as his old warhorse. But it was at the Battle of Second Manassas in August of 1862 that Longstreet truly emerged as a force to be reckoned with. In one of the most decisive moments of the battle, Longstreet launched a massive flank attack against Union General John Pope's army, rolling up the Union left and driving them from the field in a rout. The attack, executed with precision and timing, demonstrated Longstreet's tactical brilliance and earned him widespread acclaim. The victory at Second Manassas was a turning point in the eastern theater of the war, and it solidified Longstreet's status as one of the most important generals in the Confederate Army. His success on the battlefield was not just a result of his tactical acumen, but also his ability to inspire confidence and discipline in his troops, who came to see him as a leader who could be trusted to lead them through the most challenging of battles. With the momentum from Second Manassas, Lee and Longstreet turned their sights northward, launching the Maryland Campaign in the fall of 1862. The campaign culminated in the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American history, where Longstreet's forces once again played a crucial role in holding the line against overwhelming Union attacks. At Antietam, Longstreet's troops fought with tenacity and resolve, holding off repeated Union assaults at places like the Cornfield and the Sunken Road, later known as Bloody Lane. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Longstreet's defensive skills ensured the Confederate Army was able to retreat in good order, avoiding a complete disaster. His ability to manage the chaos of battle and make decisive moves under pressure was once again on full display. Though Antietam ended in a tactical stalemate, it was a strategic defeat for the Confederacy, forcing Lee to retreat back into Virginia. Yet Longstreet's performance further cemented his reputation as one of the Confederacy's most capable generals. He had proven himself time and again both in attack and in defense, and by the end of 1862, Longstreet had become one of the cornerstones of Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. As the war entered its third year, Longstreet's role within the Confederate Army would only grow in importance. He had risen from the ranks of an obscure Southern officer to one of the key figures in the Confederate war effort. Yet his greatest challenges and controversies still lay ahead. The coming battles would not only test his tactical prowess, but his relationship with those around him, particularly with Robert E. Lee. The Civil War was far from over, and for James Longstreet, the hardest battles were yet to come. As we move forward in his story, we will see how decisions made on these battlefields would shape not only the war's outcome, but Longstreet's legacy for generations to come. By the summer of 1863, James Longstreet had firmly established himself as one of General Robert E. Lee's most trusted commanders. His reputation as a brilliant tactician and a reliable leader was well-earned, but the battle that would define his legacy, both in triumph and tragedy, was about to unfold. The Battle of Gettysburg would be a turning point in the American Civil War, and for Longstreet, it would be a battle that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Following their victory at Chancellorsville, Lee and his army in Northern Virginia embarked on an ambitious campaign to invade the North, hoping to draw the Union Army out of Virginia and force a decisive engagement on Northern soil. Longstreet, commanding the First Corps, was a key figure in Lee's plan. Confident in his abilities, Lee relied on Longstreet's expertise to deliver another victory. The Confederate Army arrived in Gettysburg on July 1st, 1863, encountering the Union Army of the Potomac, led by General George G. Meade. The first day of fighting saw Confederate forces pushing the Federal troops through the town to the high ground south of Gettysburg, where they took up defensive positions along Cemetery Ridge and Cemetery Hill. Despite the initial success, the battle was far from over, and Longstreet would soon find himself at odds with Lee over the next course of action. On the evening of July the 1st, Longstreet met with Lee to discuss the battle plan for the following day. Lee, emboldened by the success of the first day, was determined to press the attack. He believed that an all-out assault on the Union center could break their lines and secure a decisive victory. But Longstreet, ever the cautious strategist, disagreed. Longstreet advocated for a more defensive approach, suggesting the Confederate Army maneuver around the Union left flank to take up a strong position between the Union Army and Washington, D.C. He believed this would force the Union to attack on ground of his choosing, where the Confederates could use their artillery to devastating effect. However, Lee was resolute, and despite Longstreet's objections, he ordered a direct assault. The second day of the Battle of Gettysburg would become one of the most fiercely debated and analyzed moments in the Civil War history. Longstreet's role in the event that unfolded has been the subject of controversy for generations. Tasked with leading the assault on the Union left at the Peach Orchard, the Wheat Field, and the Round Tops, Longstreet was acutely aware of the risks. As the attacks began in the late afternoon, Longstreet's men faced fierce resistance from the Union defenders. The fighting was brutal and chaotic, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. At the Peach Orchard and Wheat Field, Confederate forces managed to make some progress, but the Union line held firm. Meanwhile, the assaults on the Round Tops, led by General John Bell Hood, met with disaster as Union troops, specifically the 20th Maine and other regiments under Strong Vincent, repelled attackers in a legendary defense. Longstreet watched as the attacks stalled and the casualties mounted. He knew that the decision to attack the Union left had been a costly mistake, but there was no turning back. Despite the setbacks, Lee remained determined to continue the assault, setting the stage for the infamous events of July 3rd, 1863. That night, Longstreet wrote a letter to his wife, reflecting on the day's event. He expressed his doubts about the wisdom of continuing the attacks and his concern for the men under his command. But as a loyal soldier, he was prepared to follow Lee's orders, even if it meant sacrificing his own instincts. The third and final day of the Battle of Gettysburg would bring one of the most famous and tragic moments of the American Civil War, Pickett's charge. Lee, convinced that a concentrated assault on the Union center would break their lines, ordered Longstreet to oversee the attack. Longstreet, who had serious misgivings about the plan, was reluctant to give the command. But as a soldier bound by duty, he reluctantly complied. At approximately 3 o'clock p.m., 12,500 Confederate soldiers began their advance across a mile of open ground towards the Union center on Cemetery Ridge. The attack, later known as Pickett's Charge, was met with withering barrage of Union artillery and musket fire. Longstreet, watching from a distance, could only look on in despair as the men under his command were cut down in droves. The charge was a disaster. The Confederate forces were repulsed with massive casualties, and what had begun as a daring gamble ended in catastrophe. More than half of the men who had participated in the charge were killed, wounded, or captured. It was a crushing defeat for the Confederacy, and Longstreet knew that the battle, and perhaps the war, had just been lost. In the aftermath of Gettysburg, Lee and Longstreet met to discuss the retreat back to Virginia. Lee, devastated by the defeat, took full responsibility for the failure, but the burden of the lost battle weighed heavily on Longstreet as well. He had been unable to persuade Lee to adopt a different strategy, and the consequences were dire. The Battle of Gettysburg marked a turning point in the American Civil War, and would haunt Longstreet for the rest of his life. The retreat from Gettysburg was a somber affair. The confident Army of Northern Virginia was now a shadow of its former self, and the morale of the troops was shattered. For Longstreet, the battle represented not only just a military defeat, but a personal and professional crisis that would linger long after the war ended. Gettysburg would be remembered as one of the most pivotal battles in American history, and Longstreet's role in it would be the subject of intense scrutiny and debate. In the years that followed, his decisions at Gettysburg would be both criticized and defended, becoming a central part of the narrative that shaped his legacy. But for Longstreet himself, the battle was a source of deep regret. A moment when his loyalty to Lee and the Confederacy came at a terrible cost. As we continue Longstreet's story, we will see how the legacy of Gettysburg followed him into the final years of the war and beyond. The decisions made in those 3 fateful days will cast a long shadow over his life, shaping not only his role in the remaining battles of the Civil War, but also his place in history. The defeat at Gettysburg was a bitter pill to swallow for the Confederate Army, and for James Longstreet. It was the beginning of a long and difficult road. The Army of Northern Virginia, once a force to be reckoned with, was now struggling with dwindling resources, low morale, and harsh realities of war that seemed increasingly unwinnable. For Longstreet, the war was far from over, but the events that followed would test his resilience and loyalty like never before. Following the retreat from Gettysburg, Longstreet returned to Virginia with the remnants of his corps. The loss weighed heavy on him, but he remained committed to the Confederate cause. His relationship with Lee, however, was strained. Though Lee had taken responsibility for the defeat, the disagreements at Gettysburg lingered, and Longstreet's more cautious approach to warfare increasingly set him apart from Lee's aggressive strategies. In fall of 1863, Longstreet was ordered to detach from Lee's army and head to Tennessee to reinforce General Braxton Bragg's Army of Tennessee. The Confederate High Command hoped that Longstreet's presence would bolster the struggling army in the Western Theater. His arrival in Tennessee was met with mixed reactions as tensions between Longstreet and Bragg would soon surface. Longstreet's relationship with Bragg was strained from the start. Bragg was known for his difficult personality and poor relationship with his subordinates, and Longstreet was no exception. Despite their differences, Longstreet was given command of a large portion of Bragg's army and ordered to attack Union forces under General Ambrose Burnside at Knoxville. The Knoxville campaign would prove to be one of the most challenging and frustrating experiences of Longstreet's career. The Siege of Knoxville, which lasted from November 4th to December 4th, 1863, was marked by difficult terrain, inadequate supplies, and fierce Union resistance. Longstreet's forces struggled to make headway against Burnside's well-entrenched troops. The most notable engagement was the failed assault on Fort Sanders, where Confederate forces suffered heavy casualties in a futile attempt to storm the Union defenses. The failure at Knoxville was a significant blow to Longstreet's reputation. The campaign had been poorly supported by Bragg, and the lack of coordination between the two generals exacerbated the situation. Longstreet's frustrations with Bragg's leadership grew, and he became increasingly vocal in his criticisms, leading to a further deterioration of their relationship. The tensions between Longstreet and Bragg reached a boiling point in the aftermath of Knoxville. Longstreet, along with several other Confederate officers, began to openly question Bragg's leadership. There were even discussions of a potential coup to remove Bragg from command, a move that would have been serious implications for the Confederate war effort. However, the plan never came to fruition, and Longstreet eventually withdrew his forces back to Virginia in the spring of 1864. Upon return to Virginia, Longstreet rejoined Lee's army in time for the Overlands Campaign, a series of brutal battles against Union General Ulysses S. Grant, Longstreet's old-time friend. The campaign marked a return to the intense and grueling combat of the Eastern Theater, and Longstreet once again played a critical role in the Confederate defense. On May 5th, 1864, the Battle of the Wilderness erupted in the dense and tangled forest of Northern Virginia. The fighting was fierce and chaotic, with thick underbrush and limited visibility, creating a hellish environment for both sides. Longstreet, commanding his corps with characteristic skill, was instrumental in repelling several Union assaults. His presence on the battlefield was a source of confidence for his men, who had come to rely on his steady leadership in most desperate situations. But disaster struck on May 6, when Longstreet was accidentally shot by his own men in a friendly fire incident. The bolt struck him in the shoulder and neck, leaving him severely wounded. The injury was eerily similar to the one that had claimed the life of Thomas Stonewall Jackson a year earlier, and it took Longstreet out of action for several months. Longstreet's injury was life-threatening, and his survival was uncertain. The bullet had damaged his windpipe and nearly severed an artery, but thanks to the skill of Confederate surgeons, Longstreet managed to pull through. His recovery was slow and painful, and he was forced to relinquish command while he healed. During his absence, the Confederate Army faced some of its most difficult challenges yet, as Grant continued his relentless push towards Richmond. Longstreet returned to the Army in October of 1864 was a bittersweet moment. He was welcomed back by his comrades, but the situation had grown increasingly dire for the Confederacy. The war was dragging on, and the Union's superior resources and manpower were beginning to take their toll. Though still recovering from his wounds, Longstreet resumed his command, determined to do everything in his power to support Lee and the Confederate cause. The final chapter of Longstreet's wartime service was the Siege of Petersburg, a grueling and protracted battle that stretched from June 1864 to April 1865. The siege was a brutal war of attrition, with both sides suffering heavy casualties in the trenches. Longstreet, still suffering from his wounds, played a key role in the defense of Petersburg, using his experience and tactical acumen to hold off the Union forces as long as possible. As the months dragged on, it became clear that the Confederate position was untenable. The fall of Petersburg would open the way to Richmond, the Confederate capital, and the end of the war seemed inevitable. Longstreet remained by Lee's side, doing everything in his power to delay the Union advance, but the odds were overwhelming. In April of 1865, the Confederate lines at Petersburg finally broke, and the army was forced to retreat. The once proud army of Northern Virginia was now a shadow of its former self, and Longstreet, like so many others, knew that the end was near. The retreat led to a small town of Appomattox Courthouse, where Lee and Longstreet would face the final chapter of the Confederacy. On April 9th, 1865, Lee met with Grant at Appomattox Courthouse to discuss the terms of surrender. Longstreet was not present at the meeting, but he was a solemn witness to the end of the Confederacy. The surrender marked the end of the American Civil War and the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter for Longstreet and other officers. Despite the bitterness of defeat, Longstreet maintained a sense of dignity and honor in the face of surrender. He later spoke highly of Grant's conduct during the negotiations, praising the Union general for his respectful and magnanimous treatment of the Confederate soldiers. It was a moment that underscored Longstreet's commitment to the principles of honor and duty, even in the face of overwhelming loss. The surrender at Appomattox marked the end of the war, but for James Longstreet, it was not the end of his story. The years that followed bring new challenges, as Longstreet sought to rebuild his life in a divided and war-torn nation. His legacy, like that of the Confederacy itself, would be the subject of debate and reflection for generations to come. The American Civil War had left the South in ruins. Its cities ravaged, its economy shattered, and its people divided. For James Longstreet, the end of the war marked the beginning of a new and challenging chapter. The Confederate general, once a key figure in the South's military efforts, now faced the daunting task of rebuilding his life in a land torn apart by conflict and animosity. After the war, Longstreet returned to his family in Gainesville, Georgia, where he sought to pick up the pieces of his life. The war had taken a heavy toll on him, physically and emotionally. The wounds he had sustained in battle, particularly the ones at Wilderness, continued to plague him, and the loss of many close friends and comrades weighed heavily on his heart. The South's post-war economy was in shambles, and like many former Confederate officers, Longstreet faced significant challenges in finding employment. Despite his military reputation, his association with the Confederacy made it difficult for him to secure a stable livelihood. The Reconstruction era was a time of great uncertainty, and Longstreet, once a prominent figure, found himself navigating a hostile and rapidly changing landscape. In this difficult period, Longstreet turned to an old friend and former adversary, Ulysses S. Grant. Their relationship, forged on the battlefields of the Civil War, was marked by mutual respect, and Grant, now the President of the United States, offered Longstreet his support. Grant's influence helped Longstreet secure various government appointments, including a position in Surveyor of Customs in New Orleans, a role that would embroil him in the politics of Reconstruction. Longstreet's acceptance of a federal appointment and his willingness to work with the Republican administration made him a target of criticism in the South. Many former Confederates viewed him as a traitor for aligning with the very government they had fought against. Longstreet's support for Reconstruction policies, including African American suffrage, further alienated him from his former comrades, and he became a symbol of the scallywags, Southerners who cooperated with Northern Republicans. Longstreet's decisions to align with the federal government and support Reconstruction was not without personal cost. At Confederate veteran reunions, where once he had been celebrated as a hero, he now found himself shunned and ostracized. The bitterness of defeat, coupled with the deep divisions within Southern society, left Longstreet isolated from many of his former friends and allies. He was accused of betraying the cause for which so many had died, and his legacy within the South became a subject of fierce debate. The political climate of the Reconstruction era was volatile, especially in the South. New Orleans, where Longstreet was stationed, became a flashpoint for violence and unrest. In 1874, Longstreet found himself at the center of the Battle of Liberty Place, a violent confrontation between racially integrated militia, which he commanded, and the White League, a white supremacist organization. Longstreet's efforts to maintain order in the face of such hostilities underscored the deep divisions within the South and the challenges of enforcing Reconstruction policies. Longstreet's post-war years were marked by controversy and conflict, but also by a steadfast commitment to what he believed was right. His willingness to embrace the new realities of a reunited nation and his belief in reconciliation set him apart from many of his former Confederate colleagues. Yet these very qualities also made him a divisive figure, and his legacy in the South remained contentious for decades. In the 1890s, Longstreet sought to set the record straight by publishing his memoirs, From Manassas to Appomattox. In his writings, he defended his actions during the war, including his conduct at Gettysburg, and offered his perspective on the Confederate cause. The memoirs sparked renewed debate over his legacy, with some viewing them as vindication of his decisions, while others saw them as an attempt to rewrite history. In his later years, Longstreet lived a quiet life in Gainesville, Georgia. Despite the controversies that had surrounded him, he remained a respectful figure in the eyes of many, including his old friend, Ulysses S. Grant. He outlived most of his contemporaries, witnessing the dawn of the 20th century and transformation of the South in the years after the American Civil War. Longstreet's final years were a time of reflection as he looked back on a life marked by war, loyalty, and the pursuit of reconciliation. James Longstreet passed away on January 2nd, 1904, at the age of 82. His death marked the passing of one of the last great figures of the American Civil War, a man whose life had been intertwined with the most tumultuous period in American history. As the sun set on Longstreet's life, so too did it set on the era of the American Civil War, leaving behind the legacy that would be debated and reinterpreted for generations to come. James Longstreet's legacy is one of complexity and contradiction. He was a Confederate general who embraced reconciliation, a soldier who fought with honor, but questioned the cause for which he fought. A man who, despite his divisions of his time, sought to heal the wounds of a fractured nation. His story is a reminder that history is not just about battles and victories, but about choices, beliefs, and struggles of those who lived through. In the end, Longstreet's life stands as a testament to the enduring challenges of unity, justice, and the reconciliation of a divided people. As we conclude our journey through the life of James Longstreet, we are reminded of the complexities and contradictions that define his legacy. From the battlefields of the Civil War to the tumultuous years of Reconstruction, Longstreet's story is one of remarkable resilience, unwavering dedication, and profound personal struggles. Longstreet's life was shaped by extraordinary achievements and equally significant controversies. His roles in pivotal battles, his controversial decisions, and his efforts to promote reconciliation after the war all contribute to a multifaceted legacy. Through triumphs and trials, Longstreet remained a figure of immense historical significance whose story continues to provoke thought and discussion. In recent years, historians have reevaluated Longstreet's contributions and challenges, offering new perspectives on his role in the Civil War and his post-war efforts. This ongoing reassessment highlights the importance of understanding historical figures in all their complex, recognizing their strengths and flaws, and appreciating the diverse ways to which they shaped history. As we reflect on James Longstreet's legacy, we also recognize the broader lessons his life offers. His story serves as a reminder of the enduring impact of history on our present and future, and the importance of seeking understanding and reconciliation amidst our differences. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of James Longstreet's life and legacy. His story is one of courage, complexity, and contemplation, and it challenges us to look beyond the surface and appreciate the full spectrum of historical experiences. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to stay updated on our latest videos. For more content on history's most intriguing figures and events, be sure to visit our channel, History with Tim. Your support helps bring these stories to life and continue our mission of exploring the past. And remember, you can also help support our national parks, places that preserve the stories and sacrifices of history of future generations with our American Preservation Project. Stay tuned for our upcoming videos where we'll continue to delve into the rich tapestry of history, uncovering the stories and events that have shaped our world, from in-depth biographies to critical battles and pivotal moments. We're excited to share more with you. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. History is a journey, and we're glad to have you along for the ride.